more on Twitter alternatives, and the Apple earnings call. This is MacVoices. Today's edition of MacVoices is supported by Zocdoc. Find doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them. Download the free Zocdoc app at zocdoc.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, the MacVoices Live panel continues their discussion of the state of Twitter and alternative social networks that they might prefer if and when we lose Twitter. Let's go back and let the panel do the talking. The part I find really interesting, though, is it wasn't, I guess maybe it was pre-pandemic. I don't know. I've lost track of time. But, that Twitter was allegedly kind of falling into insignificance. And Facebook was the place to be. And then Instagram popped up and, the two of them were the place to be. And, Twitter was seen as kind of, anachronistic because of the limited space for your messages. And now all of a sudden Twitter is being seen as, and I personally think rightfully so, as extremely important to the fabric of information dissemination from a social media perspective. Unfortunately, it's also a way that fake news and a lot of agendas have gotten advanced too. And that's too bad, but you could probably say that about almost any social network.
Pretty much.
But I just, the idea that it has become, I think you said it. I view Twitter as very important, just like Eric said. It's an immediate thing, that anybody can participate in very quickly and very easily.
Twitter, it has been very beneficial to me.
It's
definitely.
Statement.
I have a community. I've made in-person friends that came out of Twitter. And also friends that I already had. I've been able to keep them more in touch, or sometimes that I'd lost touch with and got back in touch, and now we regularly. And as Eric was saying, the ability to get immediate, like news from Ukraine. There's all kinds of, direct. And again, you have to watch it and, well, is this really true? But you kind of have to do that even for mainstream news now.
If you were smart, you were doing that a long time ago.
Right.
You have to.
I think it's become more so. There's like sort of a merging.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys this, though. I'd be interested, because we just talked about micro.blog. What would you be willing to pay to have Twitter on a monthly basis? Forget paying for my blue check mark or, any special designation. Just to have the service you have right now, what would you be willing to pay?
Nothing.
Same.
Wow.
I would be willing to pay, but the thing is, that's not the issue. It's only if everybody would be willing to pay. If it suddenly becomes a service where there's only people that are willing to pay some amount, then it'll disappear. That means,
Yeah.
And it's interesting that some of the discussion is coming up now, which I think is valid. It's like, hey, wait a minute. I'm producing all this content. Twitter should be paying me. And, there's a good point to that. Like YouTube pays content creators, right?
Some of them.
Well, there's quite a few.
Some of them, but, do any of you think of yourselves as content creators on Twitter?
No, but
Right.
There's definitely content I read that I could see how, people could be like, yeah, why should I pay to give this content away for free? And I think, there's people that are now like, hey, wait a minute. You want me to pay you $240 to give you the content that makes your site valuable?
There are some features I would like, though. I would be maybe willing to pay money if I could get rid of all the ads. And not have ads.
Yeah.
I would be willing to pay if I don't tend to block people, but I mute people.
Yes, I've done
If
that.
there is a way to strengthen the algorithm so that when you mute a bunch of different people, Twitter figures out what the kind of connecting
What the pattern is.
all of them, and would automatically just mute everybody that has that same pattern. It maybe give me some other controls over an algorithm, give me something to make it worthwhile to pay, and I would be willing to pay. If it's just like what it is now, I'm not willing to pay. But it wouldn't take much for me to be willing to pay.
The problem with that, Eric, is then you end up with an echo chamber of just people that have the exact same opinion that you do. So you miss out on some of the diversity that's out there. And I'm not necessarily saying that all that diversity is good, but if all I'm going to be able to read is people that have the exact same opinion that I do, then what's the point? I can just look at myself in the mirror and spout off all that stuff.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, it really depends on why you're muting people.
No, it depends on you. But I'm talking about under your scenario where you're saying that Twitter would tweak their algorithm so that people that you mute, it would go out and mute every single one of those people that have something similar. And heading down that road, I think leads to, and there's too many people that do this automatically already. There's all kinds of lists out there that you can subscribe to and throw that in, and Twitter will auto block every single person on that list. And most of the people that are using lists like that never go and see what actual names are on those lists. They're just saying, oh, well, this particular actress or this particular sports person or this particular musician uses this block list and I like them, so I'm going to block all those people too. And I think that's just giving too much control over the information that you're going to see on a social media network to somebody else or something else.
Yeah, but Guy, go ahead, Eric. Go ahead.
But if you, one, I guess I would prefer not to actually have to block people and just mute. And there seems to be a difference between what happens with that. And if I'm paying enough to be able to have an effect, then I ought to be able to actually see something about the algorithm. You know, like, oh, let me look at who actually has been muted and let me kind of sample through, and maybe I add one person in or another person in. I follow such a hugely diverse group of people, both ages and interests, and some for music, some for art, some for photography, some for politics. And one of the issues I have is I might like 3/4 of the interests of the person, but that last 25%, I just get inundated with my feed. And it's not something, every night, I mute 2 or 3 people and something is causing it to show up in my feed. I keep saying, I don't want to see it. It's not matching up. As an example, I've got a couple of performance art people that I follow, but they are also followed by a bunch of OnlyFans people. I would prefer not to get my nightly OnlyFans, oh, hey, hi, from a new user that has been created in the last month that, sends me 2 or 3 pictures in a swimsuit or whatever that I then have to mute, right? If I can automatically do that, that's not helpful to me. It's not giving me anything that I want. I want the diversity of all of the different people, but I need to be able to, tone it down just a bit.
Okay, but who are you going to give that control to? You were just talking about tweaking the algorithm so that Twitter would know who those people were before you even had a chance to see what they were all about.
Well, what I'm saying is, if every single night I mute what I suspect are just a bunch of bots, there should be some pattern in all of the people that I'm muting. If every single time I mute somebody, I mute them because they're not wearing anything or wearing a skimpy outfit or whatever,
Getting warm in here.
have that automated a little bit. If I'm paying for it, I should be able to also review the list of who got muted. I'm not blocking them, so it's not necessarily going away, but it should be able to greatly reduce the occurrence. Let me review it every once in a while, right? And I like diversity in my feed, but I don't want the diversity to overwhelm the people that I want to be able to keep in touch with.
Well, I can pretty much guarantee that Twitter will never give that to you. Neither will Facebook, neither will any of these social media groups, because they hold on to the secrets of those algorithms like they're the crown jewels. And in a lot of cases, that's exactly what they are. They don't want you to be able to peek behind the corner. So,
but they do let you do some kind of muting or blocking, and less of whatever that is tends to show up.
But that's manual. That's you doing that. They're not necessarily letting you see the secret sauce behind why they're not pushing some of those users towards you.
Yeah, I don't need that part.
And you'll never know. You'll never know what that sauce is.
I just need to be able to say, pay more attention when I say, yep, this I don't like, I don't like, I don't like, I don't like. I've said it enough times. I mean, Siri can figure out what I don't like. I don't need to see how Siri works to get the benefits when I say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And then pretty soon if Siri pops up and says, hey, do you want me just to constantly not do this? Okay.
I'm really intrigued by you guys, because I can't figure out how I got so lucky or smart or whatever, but I don't see a lot of the stuff you guys are talking about. And I mean, maybe it's because I don't
follow
either. Anybody that's crazy. Well, no, that's not true.
I don't either.
I follow a guy. Yeah. I mean, of course, once in a while, one of the people I follow will retweet something, that is far left, far right, off the wall. But for the most part, I feel like, and that's what I've loved about Twitter. And I guess that's why I would pay something a month. I'm not quite sure how much, depending on what effect that, putting up a paywall would have. But I feel like I get, decent quality information that I find interesting and useful from the people that I follow. And so maybe it's just a matter of going through and determining who you're going to follow and, sticking to that. Jim?
Well, if it was just like I had to pay a certain amount, I would do that. I'm more concerned about what the effect is if there was a paywall for everybody. Because it's not like an isolated, you can't just, you poke one place and, that changes the whole dynamic of the thing. If any number above zero, and probably 95% of the base would fall off.
Yep.
But, and I want to be careful, what I claim, but I mean, that's what Matt and Gene are doing with micro.blog. And they, from what I see of micro.blog, they seem to be free of a lot of this junk. Now, that's curation by payment. So is that a bit, is it really a crisis that we don't let every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the door?
Well, I think it's not just that, but that's part of it. On micro.blog. In micro.blog, it's also, I find it's like super hard to discover anything new. You can't even find out who's following you.
That's by design.
Well, the way I built my Twitter community was, on day one, I went and I looked up Brent Simmons, the Net Newswire guy, and I said, who does he follow? And went through the list. Oh yeah, that's an interesting person I know of. That's and in 45 minutes, I had 100 people I was following. And then I started bringing, who do they follow? Who do they follow? And, in a couple hours, I had, a whole network of people that were, a bunch of interesting content. And then also Twitter seemed to learn from that, and Twitter will show me other stuff that's, interesting to me that are from people I've never heard of. And it's like, oh, okay, that's very smart of you, Twitter. It shows me junk I don't want to, but that's life, on Micro.blog, it never shows you anything except what people you're following. So it's really hard to, and then they have they have this thing that's sort of like that, basically, that Gene recommends. So Gene apparently manually goes through and here's recommended stuff. Well, okay, but that's not scalable. And that's just, so I think there's a few thousand people on Micro.blog. It's small enough that 3 people are running it. That's not going to scale to 100 million people.
Today's edition of Mac Voices is supported by Zocdoc. Find local doctors who take your insurance at Zocdoc.com/MacVoices. Zocdoc's mobile app is as easy as ordering a ride to a restaurant or getting delivery to your home. Search, find, and book doctors with a few taps. And while you want that ride or that delivery, you probably need that doctor's visit. Go to Zocdoc.com/MacVoices, find the doctor that's right for you, and book an appointment, in person or remotely, that works for your schedule. With Zocdoc, you can find the right doctor for you in your network and in your neighborhood. One that makes you feel like you're in good hands, you're supported, and you're heard. And isn't that exactly the kind of doctor that you really want? Go to Zocdoc.com/MacVoices and download the Zocdoc app for free. Then start your search for a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's Zocdoc.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Zocdoc for their support of Mac Voices. We're doing it again. We're saying that everybody has to have access to everything, and that it has to scale, or it can't exist.
But I think it does. That's the reason. That's the benefit of Twitter. If like if there's a brush fire, I look out my window and see a brush fire. I can go on Twitter and say Glendale brush fire. I'll find something about it. I've actually done that. Okay. That's not going to happen unless a big, chunk of the population is on it.
Again, I guess it almost, Micro.blog to me feels like Twitter did in the early days. It's a lot tighter. It's a lot smaller community. You're right. The discoverability is difficult, but that, as I recall, what Manton and Gene said was pretty much by design, so that there wasn't scorekeeping. In other words, it wasn't, I've got 200 followers and you only have 100 followers. It was more for people that really wanted to participate, and they either knew somebody already on there, or they knew somebody introduced somebody to somebody else, and it's a lot more small townish, if you will, and that has positive and negative implications.
I agree with what you just said, but my experience is that it's just doesn't hold my interest.
And that's fair. That's fair. May not be for you.
And I keep trying it because, Manton and Gene are 2 of my favorite people. I'm kind of hoping they don't see the show now. But if
Hello,
you do,
Gene?
if you do, I love you guys. And Manton, come back to Anna's drinking. Inside joke. He'll know what I mean.
Okay. All right.
And I keep coming back, and they have meetups a couple of times a year, which I love, and those are great. And they're like Zoom meetups, and they have sessions and hangouts, and they're really interesting. And that always gets me, like, for a couple of weeks afterwards. I'll check Micro.blog, and I kind of have to leave it in my dock. If I ever quit it, then I just completely forget it exists. Now that doesn't happen with Twitter. Twitter, I'm like, I wonder what's going on. Oh, boom. Oh yeah, there's a ton of interesting stuff going on that's really, makes me want to check it.
Yeah.
So, I think, Manton is kind of like, he doesn't want that addictive or whatever. Well, yeah, you succeeded. And I don't think that's just about the $5.
No, I agree. Hey, before we leave this, because we want to move on and just cover at least a couple other things, but I wanted to want to go around the room and ask you if you can or will reveal what Twitter client or clients you use, since we're talking Twitter. David, how about with you? We'll start with you.
I mix around. I primarily use the official Twitter app. I have Tweetbot, use that once in a while. I go on the web a little bit, but I'm in pretty much using the Twitter app. I've been happy with it. Nice thing is I have set up for notifications, so of a lot of Apple news sites and such. So I get pop up notifications all the time on my iPhone. I love it because I'm always keep on top of things. So the Twitter app seems to work good for me.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to Jim, I want to welcome Brittany Smith. She has arrived. Britt, good to see you.
Yay,
Thanks for being
Brittany.
here.
Thanks. Better late than never, right?
Always good to have you. Always good to have you. We've been talking Elon Musk and Twitter, and
I caught a little bit of it.
Did you? Okay, good. So you kind of know where we are. And right now we're just polling everyone as to what Twitter clients they use. Jim?
Okay.
I just on my desktop, I just use the web, and then on my mobile devices, I use the Twitter app. That was one thing that kept me off of Twitter for a long time, was the way Twitter dealt with developers, third party. I didn't like it. And, so I just kind of, that was, I sort of like for a long time boycotted it because I didn't like how they dealt with that. And then when I started using it, when I was like, well, I think I better just stick with, the official things because I'm too worried that I'll get hooked on some particular app and then it'll get pulled. So, I find it works okay, but I don't know, maybe I'd love something else more, but I just didn't want to take that risk.
Okay. Eric?
Yeah, I use the Twitter app. Every once in a while, I'll hit it with a web browser because I'm on a different computer or something. But most of the Twitter app, because I always have the phone with me. Occasionally, if I'm off for too long, I'll get an email message with, here are the 10 people you normally follow, and this is what they said recently, and can kind of jump back in again. And then I use the Mastodon app kind of with 3 different themed accounts to sort of, it's almost like jumping into a focus room with a particular topic. It's not as broad as Twitter, but sort of a similar feel. And that has been a better experience than Mastodon in a web browser.
But Mastodon, you're not using Mastodon for Twitter. You're using Mastodon for Mastodon.
Yes, but I flip back and forth. So Twitter, there'll be a bunch of stuff, and then there'll be some content that one of the different Mastodon rooms will have more info on, and I flip over to the science Mastodon or the photographer Mastodon, and it's less mixed up with politics and everything else, a little bit more focused. But Twitter is where I start. Twitter is where I get kind of the new topics and whatever else is going on.
Got it. Guy?
Yeah, I use TweetDeck. I've got 3 different Twitter accounts, and it allows me to set up different columns for things like, the homepage where people I follow or people that follow me, that'll show up there. The stuff that I put in shows up in a different column. Whatever activity is associated will show up in another column, and messages in yet another column. and I've got that set up for all 3 of my Twitter accounts.
Okay. Web?
That's what.
On my computer in my office, I'm not a prolific tweeter, so but on the computer on my office, I TweetDeck, or sometimes the Twitter app itself. I still have Twitterific on my phone, but like I said, I don't use it all that much. So,
okay, Britt, how about you?
I can find unmute. So when I use it, I have Twitterific, but of course I have to get my notifications through the native Twitter app. So I have both of them, but I much prefer my glorious mutes and filters that I have set up on Twitterific.
Okay. And I use Tweetbot. I use Tweetbot and TweetDeck. I tend to tweet. Well, to come to think of it, I guess I tweet through both of them, but on the outgoing. But Guy, I'm like you. You know, I have it set up with multiple Twitter
accounts,
identities, but I also have a couple channels just for specific topics, sort of along the lines of what Eric was talking about. One of them is Final Cut Pro, so I see anything that gets hashtagged or designated with that, and I mean I love I love that channel because it's pure. There's no politics.
Yeah, it's not like because the part of the problem when you, like, for example, DaVinci or Final Cut Pro groups in Facebook, it almost always devolves into fights between users and moderators and all the rest of that, and you just don't get that on Twitter with hashtagged messages that are typically related to whatever the topic is that you enjoy. So if I had one for like the Miami Dolphins, it would mostly just be about stuff concerning the Dolphins. It wouldn't have anything to do with an argument between a moderator and a user of a group that you would get in other social media groups.
Craig in the chat room says Spring for Twitter, and I just am pasting in a link to the App Store for that. I am not familiar with Spring at all. I don't know if any of you all are.
No, I've never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
I hadn't either. Fast performance, truly native design, and a highly customizable user interface. So, thanks, Craig.
I guess it's kind of relevant to this discussion. I subscribe to about 50 RSS feeds, and I'm also on several Slack groups and a couple of Discord groups and about 4 discourse forums.
Yeah, that's almost a whole nother discussion about the multiple channels of information that you can get. And that might be a good one, Jim. I don't think we'll do it tonight. But
I wasn't going to go, but that's sort of like, I consider that in the same bin as Twitter.
Yeah, well, they're all.
Some of them are more one way, and I also have Apple News.
Yeah, and with RSS feeds, it depends on who you subscribe to as to how often their site gets updated, and therefore how often their RSS gets updated.
I get a lot.
Yeah, with all those, I bet you do.
I subscribe. It's mostly tech. 9 to 5 Mac, Apple Insider.
I do.
I wanted to move on and just touch on Apple's earnings call. And no, my God, we're not going to go through the results. Anybody that wants to find the results can go see them. Did anybody listen to the call or read the transcript or listen to the recording?
Yeah,
David, you did. Anybody else?
I haven't been able to face it yet.
Okay.
As I understand it, they made a lot of money.
Well, yeah. Thank you, guys.
I'm shocked.
Thank you, Jim Cramer. I mean, it was an interesting call. I think it's always interesting to see, what is said repeatedly and then what is therefore new. And one of the things that I felt like was new this time were the economic fluctuations in currency and exchange rates. And there was a bit more acknowledgement of a headwind from things like we still maybe see a little bit of pandemic, but the supply chain is still out there. The war in Ukraine is still very much there. And those were some things that haven't been mentioned quite as often, if at all, in the past. And so, but I mean, they came out strong. The iPad was down a little bit. They with the Mac, they were very careful to point out that really you shouldn't compare this quarter with last year's quarter, because last year's quarter is when the M1 came out, which can't believe it's been a whole year since that hit the streets. But and I think it's a fair point. So
in 2 years.
2 years? Yes, it has been 2 years. You're right, Brett. Thank you.
It's been 2 years.
Yeah. So I think it's worth an hour of your time. I really do. I mean, sure, there's some of the usual boilerplate stuff, but overall, and it's just interesting to hear, instead of reading the interpretations, you hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, they're very transparent, which is great. I like how those earnings calls are.
This Mac Voices live panel wraps up in the next edition of Mac Voices, talking about Comcast, their rate increases, and the fact that they are not seeing increasing subscriber rates. That's next time on Mac Voices. We'll see you then. As always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.